My name is Brenda. I am 62 years old, and my occupation is a retired pediatric nurse. Facing a terrifying cancer diagnosis, I decided to claim total financial ruin just to expose the greedy vultures I called family. They eagerly abandoned me to suffer in the dark, absolutely certain there was not a single dime left to steal. But they had no idea what was waiting for them until my attorney stood up in a dead, silent room and revealed exactly who was getting every last penny. For 35 years, I worked grueling night shifts at the city hospital. When my husband passed away unexpectedly, my son Jamal was just a little boy. I became both mother and father that day. I poured every ounce of my physical strength, every extra shift paycheck, and every single prayer into raising that boy right. I bought his first car, paid his college tuition, and funded the down payment on the beautiful home he now shares with his wife, Chloe. I gave him the absolute world, expecting nothing in return, except his love, his respect, and the simple comfort of knowing my family would be there for me in my golden years. Then came a rainy Tuesday afternoon that changed my life forever. My doctor sat me down in a sterile white room and told me I had stage 2 breast cancer. The words hit me like a physical blow. The ground simply vanished beneath my feet. I went home feeling numb, terrified of the painful road ahead. But as I sat alone in my quiet living room, a strange, undeniable instinct washed over me. I needed to know exactly who would hold my hand through the darkest valley of my life. I needed to know if the love I bought with decades of sacrifice was actually real. I invited Jamal and Chloe over for a Sunday dinner. I cooked all of Jamal's favorite foods, trying hard to steady my shaking hands. We sat across from each other at the dining table, and I took a deep, heavy breath. I broke the news of the cancer. But instead of stopping there, I laid out my ultimate test. I looked them straight in the eyes and told them that the necessary medical treatments were going to completely bankrupt me. I lied and said my insurance was practically useless, that my life savings would be wiped out entirely, and that I would likely lose my house just to stay alive. The immediate reaction was absolutely chilling. Chloe had been sipping her white wine with a bright, rehearsed smile. That smile dropped from her face so fast, it was like watching a porcelain mask shatter on the floor. Jamal went completely rigid in his chair, suddenly finding the pattern on his dinner plate fascinating as he flatly refused to meet my desperate gaze. The warm, inviting air in my home turned to pure ice. There were no tears of concern for my failing health. There were no comforting hugs or promises that we would get through this terrible disease together. Instead, a suffocating, calculating silence fell over the room as my son and daughter-in-law realized their personal bank account had just run completely dry. 35 years of working pediatric night shifts meant I missed a lot of sleep. But I made sure I never missed a single one of Jamal's basketball games or graduation ceremonies. My husband Marcus passed away when Jamal was only 10, and from that day forward, my entire universe revolved around making sure my son never felt the void of growing up without a father. I saved every extra penny. I clipped coupons, drove a beat-up sedan for 15 years, and picked up holiday shifts so I could build a solid nest egg. I wanted my boy to start his adult life 10 steps ahead of where Marcus and I started. When Jamal brought Chloe home, I wanted nothing more than to welcome her with open arms. She had expensive tastes right from the start, admiring designer bags and luxury vacations, things I had never afforded myself. But Jamal was so blinded by love, and as a mother, his happiness was my only priority. When it was time for them to buy their first home, they came to me practically in tears, claiming the bank rejected their loan application and because of their debt-to-income ratio. Without a second thought, I wrote a check for $80,000 to cover their entire down payment. I told myself it was an investment in my future grandchildren, but it did not stop there. Chloe had a habit of treating credit cards like free money. Within their first 2 years of marriage, They called me at least 4 times in absolute panic because they had maxed out their limits on lavish trips to resorts and high-end furniture they simply could not afford. Each time, Jamal would sit at my kitchen table looking like that scared little boy who lost his dad, begging me for a loan he swore he would pay back. And each time I transferred the funds to clear their debts. I told myself I was just helping them find their footing. I was protecting my son from financial ruin, ignoring the fact that I was actually funding a lifestyle of pure entitlement. I remember one Christmas Chloe threw a fit because Jamal bought her a practical winter coat instead of the diamond tennis bracelet she'd been hinting at. To keep the peace, I went out the very next morning, dipped into my retirement fund, and bought that bracelet. When I handed it to her, she did not even say thank you. She just slipped it on her wrist, admired it in the mirror, and said it was about time someone in this family understood her standards. I swallowed that insult, smiling tightly because Jamal looked so relieved. I convinced myself that this was just how modern young women acted, that the disrespect was just a cultural gap between my generation and theirs. Every time I signed a check to cover their lifestyle, I felt a small piece of my own dignity chip away. But I pushed that feeling down, deep inside. The more I gave, the less respect I received. The shift in Jamal's attitude was gradual at first, then painfully obvious. Before Chloe, he used to call me every single Sunday just to check on my week. He used to come over and fix the leaky faucets or mow my lawn without me ever having to ask. But once that wedding ring went on his finger, I became nothing more than an automatic teller machine. The Sunday phone calls turned into brief, hurried text messages, usually followed by a request for money. If I ever tried to talk about my own life, my tired joints, or my days at the hospital, he would abruptly cut me off, claiming he was too busy to chat. Chloe was clearly pulling the strings, isolating him from me, while eagerly spending my hard-earned money. The disrespect became a permanent fixture in my home, especially whenever they brought Chloe's brother Travis around. Travis was a slick, smooth-talking white American real estate broker who wore suits that cost more than my first car. He had this unsettling habit of walking through my house like he was inspecting a property for a client. My home sits on a beautiful, sprawling half-acre lot in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. A property Marcus and I bought for a song 30 years ago, but which is now worth a small fortune. Every single time Travis came over for a holiday dinner, he would stand on my back porch, swirl his expensive bourbon, and make these deeply passive-aggressive remarks. He would look around and say things like, "You know, Brenda, it is a crying shame for one woman to hoard all this prime real estate. You should really let me list this place. You belong in a small assisted living unit, not sitting on a gold mine you cannot even maintain." I would grip my kitchen towel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Jamal would just sit there sipping his drink, nodding along as another man openly coveted his mother's home. Not once did my son defend me. Not once did he tell Travis to show some respect. I tolerated this baseline disrespect for years. I bit my tongue and swallowed my pride because I was terrified of losing my only child. I thought that if I caused a scene, Chloe would cut me out of their lives completely, and I would be left to grow old in total isolation. I accepted their rude comments, their financial drain, and their blatant greed just to keep the peace. I thought I was keeping my family together, but I was really just allowing vultures to circle my life, waiting patiently for me to fall so they could pick my bones clean. The days following my shocking announcement were the quietest and darkest of my entire life. I had prepared myself for some initial shock, or maybe a little bit of panic from my son. But I never, in my wildest nightmares, expected the absolute deafening silence that fell over my home. Before I told them I was supposedly going broke, Jamal and Chloe would always find a convenient excuse to drop by at least twice a week. They would raid my refrigerator leave with a heavy bag of premium groceries, or conveniently ask for a check to cover some sudden household emergency. But the very second that Sunday dinner ended and my financial well dried up, my phone completely stopped ringing. It was exactly as if my breast cancer diagnosis and my supposed financial ruin were highly contagious diseases they were terrified of catching. When I finally started my first grueling round of chemotherapy, I drove my old sedan to the clinic all by myself. I sat in that freezing, sterile hospital room, watching the toxic medicine slowly drip into my veins, feeling completely and utterly abandoned. I looked around the oncology ward at the other elderly patients who were holding hands with their loving children or devoted spouses, and the heavy lump in my throat felt infinitely larger than the actual tumor in my chest. I spent hours shivering under a thin hospital blanket, waiting for a single text message from the boy I had dedicated my entire existence to raising. When my phone finally vibrated one afternoon during a particularly brutal and nauseating treatment session, I felt a foolish spark of motherly hope, seeing Jamal's name flash on the glowing screen. I answered the call with a weak and trembling voice, hoping for just an ounce of comfort. But there was absolutely no warmth on the other end of the line. He did not ask how the chemotherapy was making me feel. He did not ask if I was scared or if I needed a safe ride home. Instead, he launched into a furious, breathless complaint about how my tragic medical situation was causing him severe personal anxiety. He actually had the nerve to tell me that Chloe had to cancel a luxury spa weekend with her wealthy friends because they could no longer rely on my credit card to cover their mortgage payment for the month. He whined that my illness was a massive inconvenience to their vibrant social lives, and that I was being deeply selfish for not planning my retirement finances better before getting sick. I sat trapped in that hospital chair, feeling the chemical poison course through my aching body, listening to my only child violently berate me for getting cancer. I quietly hung up the phone and cried until I physically could not breathe anymore. The physical pain of the chemotherapy was absolute torture. My aging bones ached constantly. My hair began to thin in large clumps, and my stomach churned without mercy. But none of that physical agony even came close to the agonizing heartbreak of realizing my son only loved me when my wallet was wide open. I suffered through those first few weeks in total agonizing isolation, dragging my exhausted body from the bed to the bathroom, praying to God for the strength just to survive another day. But that profound, agonizing loneliness also gave me a precious gift. It gave me crystal clear clarity. The blinding fog of motherly devotion was finally lifting, and I was beginning to see the cold, hard truth about the selfish people I called family. I truly thought I had experienced the absolute worst of their cruelty, but I had absolutely no idea how deep and dark their greed truly went. A month into my exhausting medical treatments, I had a morning doctor appointment that ended surprisingly early. The clinic had scheduled a much shorter observation session, so I drove back to my quiet neighborhood hours before anyone expected me to be home. When I pulled my car up to my house, I immediately noticed two expensive luxury vehicles parked right in my driveway. One belonged to Jamal, and the sleek imported sports car, parked right beside it, belonged to Travis. Travis was Chloe's older brother, a slick, white American real estate broker who always prowled around my property, looking exactly like a hungry wolf ready to strike. I quietly unlocked my front door and stepped softly into the foyer. Before I could even call out to let them know I was home, the obnoxious sound of clinking glasses and loud, arrogant laughter drifted directly from my own living room. I crept slowly down the hallway, making absolutely sure my shoes made zero sound on the polished hardwood floors. I stood perfectly frozen behind the hallway wall, listening to a conversation that completely shattered what little was left of my bleeding heart. There they were, sitting comfortably on my expensive leather sofas, drinking the rare vintage wine my late husband had specifically saved for a special family occasion. Travis was leaning forward, holding a thick stack of legal documents, and speaking in a low, conspiratorial tone that made my skin crawl. He was eagerly explaining a terrifying loophole in the legal system. He told Jamal and Chloe that because I was supposedly going completely bankrupt from mounting medical bills, the bank would eventually come to seize my valuable house. But Travis had a sickeningly brilliant and evil plan to stop the bank. He said that since the harsh cancer treatments were clearly making me physically weak and confused, they could legally declare me mentally incompetent. They actually wanted to claim to a judge that the chemotherapy had completely destroyed my cognitive functions and that I was no longer fit to manage my own daily affairs. Chloe chimed in immediately, asking with eager desperation how fast they could get the paperwork pushed through the local courts. Her sweet melodic voice was dripping with malicious, uncontrolled greed. Travis laughed a booming, arrogant laugh and assured her he had a corrupt contact in the legal system who could easily expedite a power of attorney transfer. He boasted loudly that once they had full legal control over my life, they could quickly transfer the deed of my house directly into Jamal's name, long before any fictional creditors could place a lien on the property. But the absolute most horrifying part of the conversation was what they callously planned to do with me once they stole my home. I held my breath, fighting back tears of sheer panic as Jamal, my own flesh and blood, calmly asked what would happen to my daily medical care once they took the house. Travis casually took a long sip of my late husband's wine and stated they would simply place me in a state-run, low-income facility. He explicitly described it as a cheap, miserable warehouse for the elderly, saying it was the absolute perfect place for a sick woman with no money left to her name. He actually laughed and said they could sell my house for a massive profit, flip the money into high-yield investments, and completely wash their hands of my depressing medical drama. Chloe excitedly agreed, saying it was exactly what I deserved for being so careless and selfish with my finances. I stood hidden in the dark shadows, shaking with a rage so intense it physically burned my chest. I wanted to march into that living room and scream at the top of my lungs. I wanted to throw them all out onto the street and call the police immediately. But decades of working in chaotic hospital emergency rooms had taught me exactly how to stay perfectly calm when the warning alarms start blaring. I realized in that split second that reacting with wild emotion would only give them the exact ammunition they needed to claim I was hysterical and unhinged. I carefully backed away from the hallway, slipped quietly out the front door, and sat in my car, trembling with newfound purpose. They were actively plotting to steal my beautiful home, strip me of my basic human dignity, and lock me away to die in a miserable state facility. They had declared war on a dying woman, but I was not dead yet. They certainly did not wait long to execute their disgusting criminal plan. Less than a single week after I overheard their vile living room conspiracy, they drastically escalated their attack. I was sitting quietly on my front porch, wrapped in a thick shawl, trying to enjoy the warm afternoon sun, when a massive commercial moving truck suddenly pulled up right to my curb. It was followed closely by Jamal and Travis in their luxury cars. My blood instantly ran ice cold, but I forced my face to remain completely neutral and weak. They marched aggressively up my walkway, carrying huge stacks of heavy cardboard moving boxes and thick rolls of packing tape. Chloe strutted right behind them, acting exactly like a military general overseeing a conquered battlefield. Without even asking for my permission or offering a simple greeting, Jamal pushed roughly past me and started dropping boxes right in the middle of my pristine living room. I calmly stood up, leaning heavily on my cane, and asked what exactly they thought they were doing in my home. Chloe put on her most sickeningly sweet smile, the exact one she always used when she was actively trying to manipulate a situation. She reached out and patted my shoulder, treating me like a severely confused toddler who could not comprehend reality. She said they were finally stepping up to be the responsible, loving family members I desperately needed during this tragic time. She falsely claimed that my illness was clearly taking a massive, irreversible toll on my mind and body, and it was simply no longer safe for me to live in this large house completely alone. Jamal refused to look me in the eye, as he began physically taking my precious family photos off the fireplace mantel, tossing them carelessly into a rough cardboard box. He mumbled under his breath that they had found a very nice, affordable care facility across town, and that it was strictly for my own good that I pack up my bare essentials before the bank swooped in to seize all my assets. The sheer audacity of their theatrical performance was absolutely staggering. They were actively treating me like a prisoner in my own home, orchestrating an illegal eviction under the twisted guise of family love and concern. That is exactly when Travis stepped forward, sliding his slick, expensive leather briefcase onto my polished dining room table. He pulled out a thick, imposing stack of legal documents, plastered with aggressive red sticky notes, pointing to signature lines. He adopted his most authoritative broker voice, trying to intimidate a woman he falsely assumed was weakened, broken, and terrified by chemotherapy. He pushed a heavy pen toward my trembling hand and demanded that I sign the papers immediately. He claimed the documents would grant Jamal full medical and financial power of attorney, supposedly allowing them to save my beloved house from an imminent bank foreclosure. Travis practically hovered over me, his large physical presence designed to bully and corner me into complete submission. He told me that if I did not sign those exact papers right then and there, the state would step in, freeze my bank accounts, and throw me out on the street with absolutely nothing to my name. Chloe flanked my other side, softly whispering toxic lies into my ear, telling me that I was far too sick to understand the complex legal jargon and that I just needed to blindly trust my only son. They had orchestrated the perfect high-pressure trap, assuming my deep fear of cancer and total financial ruin would make me completely pliable and desperate. They fully expected me to break down in pathetic tears to sign away my entire life and quietly surrender to their bottomless greed. I looked down at the pen resting on the polished wood of my dining table. I looked at the ugly moving boxes, threatening to erase 30 years of my beautiful life. And then I looked directly at my son, who was eagerly waiting to steal the very roof right over my head. I realized they genuinely believed I was a frail, helpless old woman, ready to be discarded into the trash. But they were about to find out that a mother's love might be unconditional, but a mother's wrath is absolutely destructive. I looked at those ugly cardboard moving boxes stacked in the middle of my pristine living room, and I looked at the son I had carried in my own womb and raised with my own sweat and tears. He was standing there with his arms crossed, waiting for me to just roll over and surrender my entire life to him. But something deep inside my soul snapped that afternoon. The heavy sorrow that had been drowning me for weeks suddenly evaporated into thin air. It did not just leave my body. It was instantly replaced by a cold, calculating anger that settled deep in my bones. I told them I needed to lie down, that my medication was making me too dizzy to think straight, and that I would look over the legal papers Travis brought the next day. As soon as they walked out of my front door, leaving their threatening moving boxes behind, I stood up completely straight. I marched into my bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a woman who had spent 35 years working grueling night shifts. A woman who had built a beautiful life from nothing after her husband passed away. I realized in that exact moment that I was not a victim. I was a fierce survivor, and I was going to fight this battle with the sharpest intelligence I possessed, not with the blinding emotions of a heartbroken mother. I knew exactly what I needed to do first to protect myself. If my own flesh and blood wanted to play a dirty game of manipulation, I was going to completely rewrite the rules. Early the very next morning, before the sun even fully crested the horizon, I called a trusted local security company. I paid them in cash to discreetly install a state-of-the-art hidden camera system throughout my entire house. I watched the technician wire the tiny lenses into the smoke detectors, the bookshelf, and right above the front door. I needed undeniable, crystal-clear proof of their harassment, their unauthorized entries and their vile conversations when they thought I was not paying attention. I was going to catch every single sneer, every cruel threat, and every greedy joke on digital tape. Once the cameras were completely active and sending a secure live feed directly to my phone, I put on my best church suit and drove straight downtown to the law offices of Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling had been my late husband's most trusted attorney, a sharp, distinguished man who built his entire reputation on protecting seniors from exactly this kind of aggressive financial abuse. When I sat in his plush leather chair and explained the horrific situation, placing the twisted power of attorney documents Travis had tried to force on me across his heavy oak desk, Mr. Sterling's face turned to absolute stone. He carefully reviewed the paperwork and told me that what Jamal, Chloe, and Travis were attempting to do was a massive federal crime. They were trying to orchestrate an aggressive, fraudulent takeover of my life. He looked me square in the eye and said we needed to rigorously document every single time they entered my home uninvited, and every single time they pressured me for my signature. We spent 4 grueling hours combing through my financial records, mapping out a defensive strategy that would completely neutralize their vicious attack. I walked out of his office, feeling an incredible surge of power. I was no longer a frightened widow facing cancer and a greedy family alone. I had a formidable legal shield, and I was ready to bring the absolute hammer of justice down on my own son's head. The very next day, acting on Mr. Sterling's strict advice, my first order of business was completely securing my physical sanctuary. I hired a private locksmith to quietly change every single lock on all my exterior doors. I knew Jamal had a spare key that I had given him years ago out of pure, unconditional trust, because I thought he would one day take care of me. The thought that he could just waltz into my home whenever he pleased, plotting to steal my life while I slept, made my stomach violently turn. Those days of open access were permanently over. Any future visits would be strictly on my terms, monitored closely by the silent, blinking eyes of my newly installed hidden cameras. With my home fortified, Mr. Sterling and I immediately got to work on restructuring my entire financial reality. We spent days secretly shifting all my actual tangible assets into an ironclad, irrevocable trust. My house, my massive savings, the secret commercial investments my husband had left behind. That Jamal knew absolutely nothing about everything was legally locked away tight. We established legal barriers so thick and so complex that even a highly trained army of shady real estate brokers like Travis could never pierce them. My money was entirely mine, protected from anyone who saw me as a walking bank account rather than a human being. As if God himself was smiling down on my quiet rebellion, I received a phone call later that week that brought me to my knees. It was my brilliant oncologist, Dr. Evans. Her voice was bright and full of genuine joy when she delivered the news I had been praying for day and night. The aggressive treatments had worked beautifully. The scans were completely clear. I was officially in remission. I dropped the phone and wept real heavy tears, of profound relief. I had faced the absolute darkest shadow of mortality, and I had won. But as I wiped the happy tears from my cheeks, my sharp, calculating mind immediately went back to work. I had the greatest news in the world, but I absolutely refused to share a single syllable of it with Jamal or Chloe. Instead of celebrating my survival, I made the conscious decision to lean entirely into their twisted narrative. I knew that the only way to catch them in their own wicked trap was to give them exactly what they desperately wanted to see. So I played the part of the frail, defeated, and dying old woman to absolute perfection. Whenever Chloe called to fake her concern, I made sure my voice sounded raspy, weak, and thoroughly exhausted. When Jamal stopped by to check if I had signed Travis's fraudulent papers yet, I would shuffle slowly to the door in a faded bathrobe, leaning heavily on my cane, coughing softly and complaining about how the imaginary medical debt was crushing my spirit. I let the house get a little messy. I left empty pill bottles on the kitchen counter for them to see. I acted as though the heavy burden of the cancer and the looming threat of total bankruptcy had completely broken my will to fight. I watched through the hidden cameras as they would smirk at each other behind my back, silently celebrating my physical decline. They thought my spirit was completely shattered. They thought I was just a tired, sick woman waiting quietly for the end, ready to hand over the keys to my kingdom. They were absolutely confident that they held all the cards and that I was completely at their mercy. But beneath my faded bathrobe and my slow, shuffling footsteps, I was a seasoned warrior quietly sharpening my sword. Every fake cough, every trembling hand, and every tear of defeat was a carefully calculated move to lure those greedy vultures straight into the center of my trap. I was going to let them believe they had won the war, right up until the exact moment I unleashed absolute devastation upon their lives. A loud, aggressive pounding on my front door startled me out of my thoughts. I did not even have to look at the security monitor to know who was trying to break down my door. I wrapped my faded bathrobe tight around my waist, grabbed my cane, and shuffled down the hallway, practicing my best, weak, trembling hands. As soon as I unlocked the deadbolt, the door violently pushed open. Jamal, Chloe, and Travis marched into my foyer like an invading army. Right behind them was a nervous, sweaty little man, clutching a leather binder. Clearly, the shady notary Travis had bribed to rubber stamp my ruin. They did not wait to be invited inside. They swarmed my living room, backing me right up against the edge of my sofa. Travis slammed a thick stack of papers onto my coffee table with a loud smack. He pointed a manicured finger right at my face and told me that the time for playing games was officially over. He said the bank was preparing to seize the house by Friday, and if I did not sign the deed over to Jamal right this second, I would be thrown onto the street with nothing but the hospital gown on my back. I looked at Jamal, my own flesh and blood, praying to see just one tiny flicker of hesitation or guilt in his eyes. Instead, he crossed his arms and let out an annoyed sigh. He looked at me with pure disgust and said it was time to face reality. He called me a heavy burden. He told me that my mind was clearly slipping from the chemotherapy, that I looked terrible, and that I was completely incapable of taking care of myself. Chloe stepped right up to my face, her designer perfume suffocating me, and hissed that I was being ridiculously selfish. She told me that I was practically a corpse, already taking up space in a house that her and Jamal deserved. She said I was ruining their social lives, draining their energy and acting like a stubborn child. She actually laughed and told the notary not to mind my confusion because the cancer had eaten away my brain cells. Travis shoved a heavy gold pen into my trembling hand. He leaned over me, trapping me against the sofa cushions, his face inches from mine. He demanded that I sign the papers transferring my medical power of attorney and the deed to my house directly to my son. He swore that if I refused, he would personally call the state authorities to drag me out of my own home and lock me in a psychiatric ward before the sun went down. The air in the room was thick with their malice. They had stripped off their fake smiles and revealed the ugly, rotting vultures underneath. They thought they had successfully backed a dying, broke and senile old woman into a corner. They thought I had absolutely no one left in the world to protect me. I held the pen in my shaking hand, letting the heavy silence stretch out for a long, agonizing moment. I looked down at the fraudulent documents, taking one last deep breath to brace myself for the storm I was about to unleash. I let the pen hover just an inch above the signature line. Travis was practically salivating, tapping his foot with greedy anticipation. Then a calm, deep, and deeply authoritative voice echoed from the shadows of my kitchen. The voice simply said that any signature obtained under extreme duress and deliberate fraud is completely null and void. Jamal, Chloe, and Travis all spun around in absolute shock. Stepping smoothly into the natural light of the living room was Mr. Sterling, wearing a sharp, tailored suit and holding a thick manila folder of his own. Right beside him was a massive stone-faced private security guard, whose sheer physical presence instantly sucked all the arrogant oxygen out of the room. Travis immediately puffed out his chest, his face turning beet red, and demanded to know who this man was and how he got into the house. Mr. Sterling calmly walked right past Travis, ignoring him completely, and stood protectively by my side. He introduced himself as the executor of my estate and my personal legal counsel. The sketchy notary took one terrified look at Mr. Sterling, realized instantly that he had walked into a massive federal trap and sprinted right out my front door without saying a single word. Chloe started stammering, her fake confidence crumbling, trying to claim they were simply helping a sick relative with her tragic bankruptcy. Mr. Sterling silenced her by dropping his folder right on top of Travis' fraudulent papers. He pulled out high-resolution glossy photographs taken directly from the hidden cameras I had installed weeks ago. He laid out images of them snooping through my personal mail, searching my bedroom drawers, and drinking my wine, while plotting to throw me into a state-run ward. He smoothly informed them that he had already compiled hours of crystal-clear audio and video evidence, proving their coordinated conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse and real estate fraud. Mr. Sterling looked Travis dead in the eye and casually mentioned that the state licensing board and the district attorney would find the footage highly fascinating. The entire room fell into a suffocating dead silence. Jamal and Chloe stood completely frozen, staring at the hidden camera photographs as if they were looking at ghosts. Travis opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. That is when I decided I was finally done playing their twisted little game. I dropped the heavy gold pen onto the floor. I let my wooden cane fall right beside it with a loud clatter. I straightened my back, pulling my shoulders high, and looked my son directly in his terrified eyes. My voice was no longer weak, raspy, or trembling. It was loud, firm, and filled with the righteous authority of a mother who had endured enough. I told them that my latest scans came back completely clear. I was officially in remission. The cancer was gone, and more importantly, I was never bankrupt. The colour completely drained from Jamal's face as he stumbled backward, his knees practically buckling under him. I told him the bankruptcy was nothing but a test to see if the son I had sacrificed my entire life to raise would hold my hand in the dark. A test he had failed with flying colours. Chloe tried to reach out to me, tears of sudden panic welling in her eyes, calling me Mum. But I raised my hand and stopped her dead in her tracks. Mr. Sterling then cleared his throat and delivered the absolute final devastating blow. He informed them that my late husband Marcus had been quietly investing in commercial real estate decades ago. He revealed that I had recently liquidated those secret investments. I was not a broke, dying old widow. I was a multi-millionaire sitting on a massive, untouchable fortune. But Mr. Sterling added with a cold, professional smile as of yesterday morning, the legal trust had been permanently restructured. Jamal had been entirely and irrevocably removed from my will. He would not receive a single dime, a single piece of property, or a single memory from my estate. Every last penny was securely locked away, completely out of their greedy reach forever. The sheer devastation that washed over their faces was absolute poetry. They had spent weeks eagerly digging a grave for me, only to realize they had just buried their own luxurious futures. They thought I was a helpless victim they could easily discard. But they had severely underestimated the strength, the intelligence, and the ferocious power of a mother who finally realized her own worth. The moment the crushing reality of their situation finally set in, Jamal actually fell to his knees, right there on my expensive living room rug. All of his previous arrogance and entitlement completely evaporated, instantly replaced by pathetic, desperate begging. He reached out for my hand, sobbing loudly about how he was my only child, and how we could surely fix this misunderstanding as a family. I looked down at the grown man I had given my entire life to, and my heart felt like absolute stone. I calmly pointed straight to my front door, and told them to take their empty moving boxes, their shattered pride, and their wicked intentions out of my sight forever. They scrambled out of my home like frightened rats fleeing a sinking ship. The financial fallout was incredibly swift and absolutely brutal. Without my secret safety net catching their mounting debts every month, Jamal and Chloe's lavish lifestyle imploded almost overnight. Within just 2 months, both of their heavily financed luxury cars were repossessed right out of their driveway for their entire upscale neighborhood to witness. Chloe even had to take a minimum wage retail job just to keep their lights on. Travis faced a much harsher permanent reality. Mr. Sterling submitted every single second of our hidden camera footage and all the forged legal documents directly to the state real estate board. Travis was permanently stripped of his broker license in absolute disgrace and is currently dealing with a very serious criminal fraud investigation. Justice was truly served on a silver platter. As for me, I have never felt more alive or more liberated. I sold that massive house and moved into a gorgeous, sunlit luxury condo overlooking the beautiful ocean. My days are now filled with pure joy, profound peace, and vibrant energy. I travel the world whenever I want. I treat myself to the fine things I actually enjoy, and I am surrounded by a wonderful circle of genuine, warm-hearted friends who love Brenda the woman, not Brenda the bank account. I finally have the beautiful, peaceful life I always deserved, living entirely on my own terms. Let me leave you with a lesson that cost me decades of tears to finally learn. True love does not count your coins. It holds your hand in the dark. If someone only recognizes your worth when your wallet is wide open, they absolutely do not deserve a seat at your table. Do not ever let anyone, not even your own flesh and blood, make you feel like a burden when you have been their greatest blessing. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my journey. If my story resonated with your spirit today, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so we can keep sharing these powerful stories of survival. I would absolutely love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments exactly where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. Stay strong, protect your peace, and always know your worth.